Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we are continuing on from our book, Truth and a Culture of Doubt.
Yeah.
And we're kind of smack dab in the middle, continuing on with our kind of third chapter here, are the biblical manuscripts corrupt? And so what our authors are doing is kind of taking Bart Ehrman's kind of most known book, Misquoting Jesus, and they're pulling from it kind of six main arguments on addressing the corruption of the biblical manuscripts. Bart Ehrman says that, if the Bible was truly inspired by God, he would have this mysterious way of preserving it, whatever that might mean. And so here he's lobbing six grenades into that idea that people who haven't thought about how the Bible was transmitted or preserved or maybe scandalized at some of the dealings of God throughout history would undertake. And so some of these are true, but need context, and some of them don't seem to be true, but are positions that Bart Ehrman either holds or presents in his book that need further clarification.
Right, yeah.
And so we kind of, in our last episode, laid kind of the groundwork for the six, and now we're continuing on with the first claim of we don't have the original New Testament manuscripts. We only have copies of copies of copies. So we have no idea if what we now have is what the original manuscript said.
So this is kind of like the old post office type.
Yeah, the attempt to telephone.
Yeah, telephone.
Yeah, you tell somebody at the back of the class and they keep passing it, and purple monkey dishwasher at the end.
I heard Skinner say the teachers will crack any minute.
Skinner said the teachers will crack any minute. Purple monkey dishwasher.
Well, we'll show him. Especially for that purple monkey dishwasher remark.
And y'all get a good laugh.
Yeah. And so he's claiming that's what happened with since we don't have what the originals are. That's what happened.
Right. And no one claims unless you're like a super fundamentalist about of what the originals you change what the originals are to fit that definition, but no one disputes the fact that we don't have the original manuscripts.
Right. Yeah. So he starts off this section by, asking the question, the text of the New Testament, is it reliable? Right? Is it reliable, the text that we have? We all know ancient literature by way of copies. That's how we know all of ancient literature, not originals, right? We don't have the original of Plato or whoever, Virgil, whoever, right? And so in this way, the New Testament really is no different than all the rest of the ancient literature that we have.
Right, in this aspect, yeah.
Right, right. But the New Testament is different, however, from all other ancient literature in that, at least in terms of what we're talking about here, it is far and away the best attested book in antiquity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, anybody from the Roman period to the Grecian period to any period around the time of the Bible would kill to have
as many
the manuscripts
and
the copies and the preservation and just it's quite interesting how far and away the Bible is as far as the number of manuscripts within short periods of time. You can look at it 500 years out, 1,000 years, 1,500 years, and just see this was an important document to say the least to the world.
Yeah.
And, more so than, Augustus Caesar living or, Homer is the next one. Homer's Iliad is the next most copied version. So even within that, you have textual variants within that, too.
That's amazing. Yeah. So,
in ancient manuscripts of any kind are difficult to come by, obviously. The world that they lived in, the type of material that they were made from. There's a reason that northern Africa seems to be where a lot of these things come from. The Qumran Valley, too. Yeah. Just how these scribal communities preserved manuscripts, the air, the salt water coming in. All these things corrode. Time keeps moving, and unfortunately, so do the manuscripts. So consider the number of manuscripts that exist for some significant works of antiquity. First,
what? Like what, for instance?
The works of Roman historian Tacitus were written in the 1st century. 3 manuscripts.
3 manuscripts.
Right.
All right. Well, we got 3 manuscripts of Tacitus.
Okay. He's a Roman historian, so obviously no one needed his work. The Institutes by Gaius was written in the 2nd century. 3 manuscripts.
Okay, so there we are.
Yeah.
3. So
Right.
3 seems to be a good number here. 3
You know,
manuscripts,
you're
right?
right.
I mean, you can check and say,
Right.
okay, is this one like this one like this one?
Yeah.
3, right? Yeah.
The history of Rome, again, the formation of the birthplace of humanity.
One of the greatest empires that ever existed.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Written 1st century by Petelicus.
Okay.
And we only have 1 manuscript.
Oh, just one of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're so well used, probably. That's why. Everyone had a copy. It's like the Da Vinci Code. Everyone had a copy. And it sat on everyone's shelf. Probably one of the most well-known one, the Jewish Wars by the historian Josephus.
Right.
From the 1st century.
Yep.
We kind of show that Jesus was known outside the Bible from these ones.
Right. He talks about Jesus and what he went through and how kind of the life he lived and that sort of thing.
The wars the Jews fought, and I mean it's an interesting read from a historical perspective. So a little bit more than 3. We have 50 manuscripts.
Whoa,
from
okay, so that's 50 of those,
and so a lot of people who are studying from that point of view use all of these as sources of information to inform them about the history of Rome, Roman society.
Where do we get the history of Rome from?
The factor
These
of the Middle East,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does that contrast with the Bible there, Tony?
Well, by contrast, the Bible has a little more than 50. 50 is a lot, right?
Yeah, 60.
60. Yeah, a little bit more than that. By contrast, we have over 5,800 surviving manuscripts of the New Testament. Over 5,800 surviving manuscripts. What's more, we have innumerable citations of the New Testament manuscripts by way of the early Christian writers and teachers, right, that were in the early church. So they quoted, in fact, these citations are so numerous that Metzger and even Bart Ehrman have declared that these citations would be, notice this, sufficient alone for the reconstruction of practically the entire New Testament, just from citations and quotations of these early
Destroy
Christian
all the
fathers.
Manuscripts. Just cite secondary sources of the early church fathers or people that are pulling quotes from. You get the New Testament again.
How about that?
That's pretty impressive. But 5,800 surviving manuscripts. And there's a group out there that is doing spectrometric scans of these, and so that number does fluctuate here and there because what this library counted is double counted, or we found the scroll rolled up and they did a laser X-ray of it and is able to unroll it digitally,
and so that's another manuscript.
And so they're always releasing different things, and you always hear like P58, P63, all these things. So P is for parchment. So there are these snippets within early copies of that original one. I think John 8 is kind of the P36. I think that's one of the earliest ones. So
I think is it 18? It might be 18.
Oh, it could be. Could be. So it's quite interesting to look at these old ones and see, wow, this is generations. There's small leaps forward, not huge generations of copies in between, and so we're kind of able to trace a little bit of the history of what the original looked like. So the New Testament not only has more manuscript evidence than any other book from a similar time period, it also has the smallest time gap between surviving manuscripts and the original manuscript of any work of antiquity, showing that people viewed it as an important document.
So instead of a gap of maybe 1,000, here's when it was written, and here's the first kind of manuscript that survived 1,000 years, maybe 500 or 1,000 years. It's a whole lot shorter than that for the New Testament.
And it's quite amazing just understanding what the history of the early churches as it is in contrast with the Roman history of coming in and viewing it as a religion of derision and rebellion, and wanting to scapegoat Christians for the fall of Rome and the burning of Rome, and then 300 you have Roman Caesar going out and saying find these books and burn them, and in the 300 AD time period, you have the destruction of so many early sources, and so what would have been preserved theoretically if those hadn't been the case. And so the fact that we have 5,800 from a time period where even Christians faced persecution is quite amazing.
Impressive.
Yeah. The New Testament itself was written between AD 50 and 90, and our earliest manuscripts date to only about 35 years after the last book of our
So we have
New
a
Testament was actually written.
scrap of a manuscript that's about only 35 years after it was written.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just a known one.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Surviving today. So, and it looks pretty torn up, but you'd probably look the same after 2,000 years.
That's right.
And we have many more manuscripts from the 2nd through the 4th century. So, once you kind of got out of persecution, or once the gospel spread to the world, it's hard for the might of Rome to kind of come down on everything. So, it was the first blockchain. It was the first tracing of family copies right there.
Yeah. Also, the relatively small temporal gap, the time period, means that it's unlikely that the textual tradition could have been radically changed, during the intervening period without there being evidence for changes visible in the manuscripts that, we have available today.
Right. So you'd have to have someone with a lot of power and might, and being able to erase the naughty versions that say, oh, Jesus was actually a woman, or Jesus said to have multiple wives, or whatever you think it might have been originally in there. And if you watched enough back in the day when History Channel used to play actually history things, what the original Bible really said.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Then your fanciful imagination, and then you look at the secondary source and you go, oh, well, that's not even in there either.
Yeah. So really what this means, in other words, is that if a particular manuscript of a New Testament book, let's say Mark, had been changed by a scribe in the late 1st century or early 2nd century, it is unlikely that the change would have been able to be to replace the original reading quickly enough so that our 3rd and 4th century copies of Mark would fail to preserve the original text at all. Right. So that's the idea here, because of this small gap between when we have what we have from when it was written.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what Ehrman is arguing is not merely that significant changes might have crept in immediately after writing the original text. What he is saying, not only did those changes creep in massively and immediately, but that then there's also no trace of these changes, even in the early manuscripts.
So that's a pretty significant claim, right? There's no trace of these changes at all in the manuscripts, right?
Still a possible.
So they snuck in there, but we don't know them.
Right. Yeah. It's still a possible conclusion, but with extraordinary claims comes extraordinary evidence, right? That works both ways.
Yeah, I think so.
That we submit is undue skepticism coupled with a dose of conspiracy theory, which everyone likes. So you got your Dan Brown in there.
Yeah.
Ehrman's claim is we have lost traces of the original because of the changes, but he has no way of knowing that.
Yeah, how in the world, if we don't know what the original is, and how do you know it was changed?
Right.
I mean, how do you know that what we've lost if we don't know what it really was, right? I mean, it's kind of that's not, that's kind of a weird kind of argument, right? We don't know what the original was, but we know we don't have the original. Well, I think that they're right. That's just being, undue skepticism, right? That's being obstinate, right?
And I think even making that claim of we know this thing isn't in the original.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know if you don't know what the original was?
Right.
I mean,
you can't have it both ways, right? You really can't have it both ways, right?
You have a little caret asterisk and circled, like we're stapling this extra manuscript to John 8, so there's John 8.5 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
so either we know what the original was and therefore we know what the changes are, or we don't know what the original was and therefore
everything is available.
Yeah.
So it is more likely that we have the changes and the original in our manuscript tradition, since we have so many other copies.
Right, and so that's a really important point, right? We have so many copies that we probably have the original among all of the various copies, right? And so the idea here is just to find, what the original was.
And so if you heard the term textual criticism, that's the group of people that study the manuscripts, the variants, tracing families of variants, talking about different classifications, how strong a variant is, all these things. So You have like Michael J. Kruger, James White, to name just a couple of people that are out there doing the work, and Ehrman as well. He's doing the same type of work with under a Metzger before him.
So, and that's just in general, but with the New Testament, we know the original is in, the words are in there, right? Because, it's God's word.
Right. And if we say that's not the case for here, then we can't do it for really any book of antiquity of that era. So in other words, we have too much of the text, not too little. When people make the claims, how do you know what was originally in the Bible? There could be massive changes. Well, then all those documents that we do have, you're going to have to find it somewhere.
Right.
So we could well say that it is more likely that our problem is that we have 105% of the text, not that we have lost some of it. And there are kind of grades of different types. So, if you're, and we do this all the time. If back in the day when we're hand copying things on this thing called paper before technology.
Paper, what's that?
Right. You're reading a line, and the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, and you get to the end of lazy, and then you start the new line. You forgot that you wrote lazy, and so now it's the lazy dog. Yeah. Well, that's a textual variant. Yeah, that's a textual variant. You're copying from the original.
What was the original?
Right.
Was it lazy, or just lazy, or what was it?
Yeah.
Right. We don't know.
Right. So that's the nice thing about it, is because you have so many to compare. Yeah. And you have different generations, different families. And a whole group of study notes that you can do this from. With the Christian documents, this stuff isn't new or unknown. It might not be taught in church. It might not be known because you hear, textual variant. You might think, that's a little difficult to understand, or that might challenge my faith. But honestly, it's there actually to support the fact that your foundation in faith in the Bible and the trust in the Bible is well founded, because it's so well preserved. Yeah.
Good, yeah. All right, so the second claim here in terms of this chapter, are the biblical manuscripts corrupted, is this. Here's the issue here. He says, while many variants, that is differences, in the New Testament manuscripts are insignificant, right, like lazy, right. In many cases, the likely original reading is highly disputed, Ehrman wants to tell us, and the most likely rendering affects core theological beliefs, right? So these are huge, important, he says in many cases, changes that have really affected what's going on here, right? Is the claim here, right?
So there's no John 1. We don't know where Jesus was in the pre-existence, and so that's just added later. So if you can find that a change was made there, then we question where Jesus was before he was incarnate. Yeah. I mean, there are implications to that claim, and so we should be able to see these different communities coming around and saying, "Oh no, I have the real Jesus. No, I am the real Jesus. I'm Spartacus." So, in misquoting Jesus, Ehrman is particularly interested in surveying the most significant variants. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Apparently, in order to call into question the reliability of the New Testament. He writes this: in some instances, the very meaning of the text is at stake, depending on how one resolves a textual problem. Was Jesus an angry man, like Mark 1:41 says? Was he completely distraught in the face of death? Hebrews 2:8-9. Did he tell his disciples that they could drink poison without being harmed? Mark 16:9-20. Is the doctrine of the Trinity explicitly taught in the New Testament? 1 John 5:7-8. I mean, okay. I mean, so some of those are good.
Good questions, right?
But, is Jesus an angry man? Is that to find out that's not the case? Is that going to upend your? I'm saying that there are answers to these questions, but is that such a theological challenge? Okay.
Yeah. Did he get angry? Is mainly the problem. Several responses are in order concerning these specific examples listed by Ehrman. Right. First, Ehrman seems to want to have his cake and eat it too. This is what we've been talking about. Right. On the one hand, in the previous quoting and much of misquoting Jesus, he seems to want to leave the impression that we don't really have a clue what the original said, right? But on the other, Ehrman is confident that he has determined which reading is the earliest, as you can readily see once you read his explanation of the textual evidence. So he wants to have it both ways, and of course, Sorry.
A little hard to do that. Yeah. Second, in 3 of these cases, almost all evangelical scholars and translations would agree with Ehrman.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are passages that are are issues, right? Yeah.
Most modern Bibles exclude the variant Trinitarian formula found in a small number of manuscripts in 1 John 5, 7 through 8. And this is something too where when I was talking to Mormons, this is the one verse that I would use until I learned about this, and then I removed it because I found out there are other ways to show that the Trinity is in the Bible.
Bible's full of it. New Testament is full of it. Right. Yeah.
And so it would be nice to find a verse that says, and the Trinity as defined by Paul would state this. And so 1 John 5, 7 through 8, for there are 3 that testify in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. Of these 3 are one. And that's due to the manuscript evidence against such reading.
Right.
So Christians have known about this.
Yeah.
If you open up your Bible, if it's got study notes, it's probably bracketed. It's probably italicized.
Yep.
There's probably a note at the bottom.
It's telling you that this is this may or may not have been in the original. Yeah.
And so, why was this done? And I don't think they get into it. But one of the theories behind it is that the person copying this that made its way early was, as we put notes in our books, a scribe came along and wasn't sure if that note was there. And so, is it better to copy everything or to be unsure and leave stuff out?
Yeah.
And I forget, there's a specific term, and I forget, like it's an attempt to be holy or something like that. So the scribe would want to copy more things, and so once that gets entered in early, then it's entered into the stream of the copies.
Right.
And so there are other books out there that talk about this, and so encourage you to find one on that if that one is of particular interest to you.
Yeah, good. Yes. Third, in the other 4 examples that we saw, different textual critics have come to different conclusions. Right. So, for instance, if Mark were depicting Jesus as being angry in Mark 1:41, this would not be the only place where the New Testament portrays Jesus as angry or indignant. Right? Matthew 21:12, Matthew 23:13-36. The Bible in no way equates all anger with sin.
Right.
So, this doesn't cause a major theological problem no matter which reading is adopted.
Right. And so that should challenge your idea of who Jesus is if you're thinking he's a peace-loving hippie.
He never got angry. He was always happy.
Right. Yeah.
Happy Jesus.
He never went into the temple once or twice, depending on your take on that.
Yeah,
and so, there are questions that come up about this, but that's because of how the Bible is preserved and transmitted. And one could argue that this is one of the best ways to have transmission, this entering into history using the scribal process, entering into the time period that it was with Rome. All roads led to Rome, but they also all led out of Rome.
That's right.
There was a universal
language. You could have it both ways there, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, depending on what side of the street you walk on. And so, unlike the Quran, where, you have the Uthmanic revision, where he collects all of them, burns all of them, and says, here, this is the only one you're going for. For the Quran, you don't have notes at the bottom. Right. There are very few preserved pre-Uthmanic revision texts for the Quran, and it's hard to say that what is in the modern Quran is what was there in the original. Now, there are theological implications that Muslims bring into that say, it's preserved from on high and kind of handed down in this kind of gold plate fashion, but with the New Testament, we don't see that. And I would think that this preservation of the word through this way shows, well, how do we know what salvation is? Well, I can be confident because the text hasn't been altered, and where it has or where there are questions, there's a note.
We can identify it.
Right.
Yeah.
So in summary, the point here is not that the reader should be concerned with what the original text actually said in the cases in question. Ehrman is right to argue that these variants are important.
They are, right.
What the original text actually said does matter, though. Yes. So, however, Ehrman is wrong to give the impression that depending on the variant reading chosen, there is some kind of irresolvable problem for the Bible. As we have seen in several cases, he adduces a reading that virtually all scholars, conservative or otherwise, agree is secondary. In other cases, even Ehrman's reconstructed wording is correct. There is no problem because a given textual assertion is also found in other places in the New Testament, and no real theological contradiction or incongruity exists.
Right. So there are other places in the New Testament that talk about, for instance, Jesus being angry, right? When he cleansed the temple and that sort of thing. And so, so what's the big deal?
Right. It tells Peter, "Get me behind me, Satan." I'm sure he didn't say it with a smile on his face. In interviews, Bart Ehrman also gets asked, by the reporter, "Well, what do you think the original Bible said?" And even he's readily admit, "Well, it's pretty much what we have now."
So sometimes one gets the impression that Ehrman believes simply by casting doubt on the New Testament's reliability that he's proven his case, right? But not so. He and others like him should listen to the way his, in many cases, legitimate concerns can be answered. They can be answered. Right. If the answer is satisfactory, then there's no more legitimate reason for doubt. So as with other areas that we've considered, we see a problem with Ehrman's exaggerating the significance of the issues that he raises. This is a big deal. Well, no, it can be answered. Right? So the slant put on things is always tilted in the direction of doubt. Right? Of course, this sells books. So even when other answers do exist, they do not lead to conclusions that he makes about the scriptures being full of problems.
Right. And it's logical to see why skeptical scholarship popularizing this would be the case, where it's like, oh, here's another quiver in the arrow for the doubting community or the atheist community, or people can use this for sowing seeds of doubt in believers. Okay, but the other one is because people haven't been exposed to this. Christians haven't been exposed to this. They don't understand where the Bible came from, the transmission process, the messiness of history. Like church history. If you read about it and you're like, wait, how close we were to some things rather than others, and understanding that the beaming God's word into people's brains isn't the way that it happened. You don't just get a blinding light sent on you and you're suddenly downloaded with God's word and you start copying it without thought. And so, I think Christians have this ahistorical facsimile in their mind of what the Bible is or how it got that way. And I just don't think people are turned on enough of what textual criticism is. That sounds very, scholarly. And I'm trying to just pay bills here and figure out what God wants from me in my life and be able to, tell the gospel to my coworkers. And that's scary enough. I don't want to have to learn about,
how it got here.
Is that one verse and once you take it out, is the Trinity done? So God has chosen to work with and through people down through the ages. And of course that's messy. We're sinful creatures, but somehow God has chosen to do that, and so we have what we have, right? But it's a continuation of exactly what we see in the Old Testament. That's what God uses. You read these from a perspective of a both and. Isaiah says, in Isaiah 6, I was walking along minding my own business. Suddenly I'm caught up to the throne room of heaven where angel cleanses my lips with a hot coal, and Jesus
starts preaching.
Jesus says, whom shall I send? And then he goes and says, this is the word of the Lord. And so Michael Kruger in one of his books, the Question of the Canon, I believe it is, talks about how the New Testament continues exactly what the Old Testament did with these covenants and the fact that these letters are covenant based and the similarities between Old and New Testament. It's the New Testament authors didn't think that they were doing something radical and revolutionary. They were continuing the tradition of exactly what
God had done in
the prophets did before in the seers. So
good. So we need to be careful with undue skepticism because it kind of makes us jaundiced in terms of how we look at things.
Right. One more. I think we can do one more. The claim theory here is that there are more variants in the New Testament manuscript than there are words in the entire New Testament.
Wow.
So think about this. There's probably something like 24,000 words, give or take. And so there are 300 to 400,000, maybe more, maybe less, variations within the text.
Right. Wow.
So
that's a lot.
What is that? 10 changes for every one word?
Yeah, right. So this has become one of Ehrman's standard one-liners used in various media appearances and debates, right? He often also adds that there are somewhere between 200,000 to 400,000 variances in our manuscripts. Mm-hmm. Wow, right? These numbers can overwhelm someone unacquainted with the field of textual criticism because, quite frankly, they mean little. Right. They don't mean it. They sound big, but they mean little. Right.
If you're a pitcher and you throw 3 balls in your entire career, and you've struck out one batter, well, that's really good. You have a 100% strikeout. Oh man, that person! I'm signing that person to the Yankees.
Yeah. Now, big number, but it doesn't mean very much, right?
Now throw out 1 million, and that number goes down. And so, when statisticians do that for baseball, they understand. Oh wow, a .233 average. Wow, that's really impressive. Well, that's 20%. You get failing marks on a test for that, but in baseball, that's really good. And so why are these numbers? Why do they mean little? Right. Well, first of all, as a response to the claim 1 has made clear, we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the New Testament manuscripts. No other piece of literature in antiquity even comes close.
Right. Again, we have thousands and thousands and thousands. So
where we have 5,200, I think for the Odyssey, it's like 300, or it's something. I don't think it cracks 1,000. It's far and away. I guess no one wants to read about a guy on a boat for 7 years getting back to his wife.
Actually, probably a lot of people did, and that's why we have as many as we do. Right?
Or maybe it stayed on the shelf longer for most people. Right. And there weren't so many people thumbing through it and messing it up. Right. So most see this overwhelming amount of evidence for the New Testament manuscripts as positive. The more manuscripts we have, the more comparison can be made by scholars to determine with higher probability the original words of the earliest manuscripts.
Right. So we can compare one with the other and trying to get an idea of what exactly was the original.
Right. Yeah. Again, the scholars, they group these types of manuscripts in location or by textual variants or by what book of the Bible it's talking about. So there are many different classifications that you can make, just like you do with anything in the science world, animals and plants and everything like that. So naturally, the more manuscripts we have, the more variants we have, right? Right. Because copyists made errors in copying.
No, that's really? Right. You mean people made copy mistakes? Wow.
Right. Again, how is this copying being made? And we think, it's this guy. He's in this tome of scrolls. He's sitting down. He's got his little quill, and he's doing it carefully, and he's counting the numbers. Exactly. Well, some scribes did that, absolutely. But others are riding on horseback or donkey, and they're being chased by Roman soldiers, and they're I have a 3-month journey to get to this next church. I better start my copying. And so the fact that people are writing in different forms, in different ways, it costs money to produce these. So exactly under what conditions there. If you had somebody in the family who was a learned person, maybe you take it to them. I mean, there are all these different ways that we can attribute to the number of copies that we have.
Right, and what we'll see here later on in the chapter is actually the folks that did the copies were pretty well organized.
Right. Yeah, that's the crazy thing about it is just how well it has been preserved.
Yeah.
So the large number of variants is actually a testimony to how much evidence we have.
Right.
And honestly, if you were to be skeptical about the rise and fall of Julius Caesar, literally the fall of Julius Caesar, and you had 5,300 manuscripts all testing this, you say, beware the Ides of March. I don't think he was assassinated. You're like, well, I have 5,300 documented things, and if you had it in the same way that the New Testament does, scholarship would laugh in your face about you being that skeptical.
Claims. Yeah,
they would love to have this many. So
Secondly, the overwhelming majority of New Testament variances are just minor and insignificant. Right. Most of the variances are spelling errors, nonsense readings that are easy to spot, meaningless word order changes, right, or Greek article changes that make no difference in the English translation.
Right. Again, we're not writing in English, so to say, the quick brown fox or the brown fox that is quick, kind of the same, but in Greek, it's almost pick your preference, because there are changes that you can make depending on what school of training you went to, or just how you can say it in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ehrman himself at times has to admit that this indeed is the case. For example, he writes, quote, "To be sure, of all the hundreds of thousands of textual changes found among our manuscripts, most of them," he tells us, "are completely insignificant, immaterial, and of no real importance of anything other than showing the scribes could not spell or keep focused any better than the rest of us." End quote, right?
So if you're trying to copy Peter and you're a highfalutin Greek scholar who's read and written Greek his entire life, Peter's Greek is terrible, and so you might have a hard time being that terrible as a good Greek. So there are different explanations within this.
So if most of these thousands of variants are insignificant, then why does Ehrman keep making statements about the numbers of changes being greater than the number of words in the New Testament? Right. It makes for a nice soundbite,
right? Yeah.
But does little to bring clarity to the discussion.
It would be more beneficial. More beneficial for us, I guess, for him to say, out of the 400 or so textual variants within the scope of the New Testament, 8 of them are downright nefarious to the Christian worldview or doctrinal changes. Okay, well, 8 doesn't sound like that impressive, but we can then focus on the 8. So there you go. All right, so that's 3 of our 6 for this chapter, and we'll finish up next one with completing this chapter, hopefully. And thanks for joining us. We hope you are encouraged by this and continue to understand that this is just a small book that is unpacking a lot more textual variants. Again, it's a whole discipline within secular scholarship too. That they do this with different books or the Gettysburg Address. They figure out, okay, what might have been the actual Gettysburg Address. So that's really interesting too. And so I like the subject. It's how I got involved with watching all of James White's stuff because this is really geeky stuff. So I appreciate this. So hopefully you do too. Hopefully it understands a little bit more, and hopefully encourages you to understand, that the Bible that we hold in our hand is trustworthy, but it's also not this, entire monolithic thing that has come down from, directly on high in the way that you might have originally thought, because it's
God used people to accomplish his purposes.
It did come down from on high, but in maybe a different way. And
they said exactly what God wanted them to say, and we have exactly what God wanted us to have, right? But it was messy.
Right.
It was messy.
And so there are trade-offs to that.
Yeah.
And so many books out there talk about this as well. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for continuing watching, listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.